As you can see, we have a guest with us. He's been with us. Well, he actually came and had lunch with us. For introductions, I would like to go to microphone for Grand Chief Ed John.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Chiefs. Good afternoon. I trust that you'll enjoy your desserts. I'd like to welcome our guests this afternoon, the leader of the opposition party, Adrian Dix, and the critic for Aboriginal Relations and Reconciliation, Scott Fraser. Many of you know both of them. Scott in his former capacity as a critic, and Mr. Dix as a new leader of the opposition party. As you all know, there's been some significant changes in the political leadership of the political parties in this province. This morning you had the opportunity to meet the leader of the governing party, and this afternoon we have the opportunity to meet with the leader of the opposition party. And of course, politics being what it is, it's important that we hear from the new leaders as to where they see Aboriginal issues located in this province as important public priority issues, and how they will be addressed from the respective quarters of both the governing party and, in this case this afternoon, from the opposition party. There will be an election for sure, maybe in the near future, who knows. There's every likelihood there could be, but we don't know that for certain. But we need to be mindful of the nature of the relationship that First Nations have with the province of British Columbia. And the province of British Columbia is, on a political scale, is represented with a democratic institution called a legislature, which has both a governing party and an opposition party, and issues that are important to us need to be addressed and advanced both through the governing party and through the opposition party. We've had in the past a constructive working relationship with the previous leader of the opposition, Carol James, and certainly would like to thank her for her tremendous support and contribution to the work that we've done in British Columbia, but also in the same breath to welcome the new and incoming leader of the New Democratic Party, who formed the official opposition in this province. So with that, I'd like to introduce Mr. Dix and welcome him here, certainly to our chiefs, and looking forward to hearing your comments. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and I think that's working. Can everyone hear me? I wanted to, everybody? Yeah, okay. I just wanted to first of all recognize and acknowledge the Coast Salish and Squamish First Nations, on whose territory we hold this meeting today. It's an enormous honor for me to be here at the Joe Mathias Center at what is called, I think, Joe's Place or Joe's House, to have this discussion. I hope to have the opportunity for an exchange of views today, if that works with our co-chairs. I'll say a few words and then hopefully have an opportunity to listen to you in an open and direct way about both the issues that you think are important, the issues that you want to raise with me. I want to acknowledge the First Nations Summit Task Group, Grand Chief Edward John, of course, and Dan Smith and Chief Doug White. I want to acknowledge Leah and Ray, our co-chairs here today, and thank them for inviting us, and my colleague Scott Fraser, who's to my right, who's our outstanding spokesperson for Aboriginal relations in the BC legislature. So I want to talk about a few things today, first of all. And I want to acknowledge a few things today. And I also want to say I saw Grand Chief Sean Atleo. I don't believe he's here. And I also saw Stuart Phillip here. And it's a great honor to have him here as well today. I want to talk a few things about where I see the priorities of the province being. where the position of the official opposition is, and the priority that we give to First Nations issues in British Columbia. And I think, first of all, I want to say that I replaced, as leader of the NDP, an outstanding representative, someone who always gave these issues priority, Carol James. Carol continues to be an important advisor to me, both on First Nations issues and on all issues, and plays a remarkable role in the legislature. I think her role in building relationships is something that I intend to follow through on. The first thing I wanted to say is that I am deeply committed to the treaty process. And I think this is a fundamental thing. Over time, as all of you know, politicians have come here and elsewhere and talked about their commitment to the treaty process. I think it's important. As you know, I worked when I was Chief of Staff to a previous Premier, Glenn Clark, on the treaty with the Nisga'a. I also have had the opportunity in the legislature to vote in favor of 3 treaties in the 6 years I've been a member of the legislature. Most recently, last week, the treaty with the Yale First Nation. But I think we all have to acknowledge that that treaty took 17 years to negotiate, and that is too long, and that there are 60 other First Nations at the table, and the prospects for progress are not what they should be. I think we have to acknowledge that. And that's why I think myself, and I don't know, I didn't have an opportunity to hear what the Premier said this morning, but I think it's time again for a summit involving you, involving the Prime Minister, and involving the Premier to kickstart this process again, because we are not making enough progress. It's time that we gave the Treaty Commission more teeth and more resources, because that will be required to get there. It's time that we considered new models of settlement, including those we worked out by the Tripartite Commission in 1999 to advance treaty discussions. I think as well we need an action plan to do that now on a regular basis that we work together on. And these are all ideas I'd like to consider. And as well, commenting again on the treaty discussion we had in the provincial legislature, I think it's time that the provincial legislature itself gave priority to these issues by having a standing committee permanently overseeing and working on these issues. It isn't good enough that the provincial legislature, having sat 24 days in a year, waits to the last 2 days of a session to address these issues. It is simply not good enough. And the discussion started with 3 days left in the session and ended with 2 days left in the session, and that's not good enough. We need to give priority to these issues on a more regular basis, and I am committed to doing that. I think secondly, I wanted to say that you need to see and expect from political leaders action, not words. On my first day opposite Premier Clark as leader of the opposition, I raised the issue of the missing women's inquiry and the fact that the government had not chosen, in its wisdom, to fund groups who wanted to participate in that inquiry. First Nations groups, women's groups, community groups in the downtown east side. The Premier, it should be said, responded to that question before and after with derision. She felt that that was not a subject worthy of her attention in question period, and I think she's wrong. I think in that case, and it shows the commitment we have as an opposition to that issue, that it's the first issue we raised, that funding should take place. That funding should occur. That funding should be provided. The issues raised in that inquiry, for example, are some of the most important issues facing all British Columbians, not just the groups, interested groups. And for that inquiry to succeed, everybody has to be able to play their full role. The Premier has suggested, and this is where it gets political, the Premier has suggested that she doesn't want to spend money on lawyers that could be spent on services. I don't think that that's the choice facing people. We're all watching the Canucks right now. It would cost 8 commercials for the HST during the hockey game to pay for the funding required in this case. And I think it's time that the province decided, following the recommendations of the Commissioner, to provide that funding. The second issue, because we've just both become Premier and Leader of the Opposition, that I raised with the Premier was the issue of the Taseko mine and its impact and what it represents for the Chilcotin First Nation and for First Nations across British Columbia, and what it means for the environmental assessment process. And I think we have to take a step back. For me, the first day I'm elected as Premier of British Columbia, and I get an opportunity to talk to the Prime Minister, my first priority and my second priority and my third priority will be to speak to the Prime Minister about getting involved and putting adequate resources in the treaty process, which is fundamental. My first priority will not be asking the Prime Minister of Canada to overturn a federal environmental assessment process. I think that sends the wrong signal. You know, there's a lot of talk in these discussions about who's responsible, that bureaucrats are slowing up the process. But politicians count too. And what is said sends a message to everybody. And what was said in that case, in my view, sent the wrong message. And I've had a discussion in the legislature with the Premier about that and strongly encouraged her to change her views. But the situation has not got, in my view, better. It has got worse. The fact of the matter is, in the case of that, in the case of Testambini, in the case of Fish Lake, in the case of that mine, the Prosperity Mine, we went through a provincial environmental approval process and a federal environmental approval process. And I think the consequence and the result of those two processes were an embarrassment to the provincial process. Let's face it. And we have to reflect on that and reflect on how, in fact, not just in the words, but in fact, First Nation interests are reflected in those discussions. That in that case, rights were alienated and a very different decision was made by the federal process. That means we have to have specific changes to the provincial process, yes. But when we get rulings such as rulings of Judge David Vickers, that we need to respect them in fact. They are rulings in law, and we need to respect them in fact. And that didn't happen in this case, and the consequences continue to be very serious. I think it's true in that case, in the case of the Prosperity Mine proposal, that there's a new proposal on the table. I think that reflects, in fact, that what the government and others in the company were saying was not correct about the viability of the mine. But I am concerned that lessons have not been learned here with respect to economic development. I am concerned that prior to the tabling of that proposal, a proposal that most of us read about in a newspaper, there was no further consultation. It's as if the lessons in that proposal were not learned by anybody. And that needs to change. And that is an issue that we raised in our first days in the provincial legislature, my first days as Leader of the Opposition. It's a different approach. I know that First Nations support resource development, but they have to be included in a serious way. Their rights, which are rights that are set and have been established, not just in the Constitution, but in the courts, have to be respected. And let's face it, I want to be very blunt here, it sends the wrong message when we have an issue as divisive in the community as the Taseko mine, that the Premier of the province is seen to take sides. I think we need to respect the process and respect the rights of First Nations in fact as well as in words. And that is my commitment to you as Leader of the Opposition and as hopefully, shortly, a future Premier of British Columbia. And finally, I want to talk a little bit about what I would call the core of why I'm in politics, which is the issue of equality and addressing issues of poverty in our society. I am very pleased about the agreement that was signed today with the federal government, which is a positive sign of progress. But here in British Columbia, we need to do better as well. It is my first priority, not my last priority, to have an anti-poverty plan that has meaning in British Columbia, an anti-poverty plan that speaks to First Nations and works with First Nations to provide real solutions. I think levels, for example, of diabetes and other illnesses that are unacceptably high, and I speak myself as someone with diabetes, and I know this, the levels of diabetes that are unacceptably high, social determinants of health, which show enormous inequality in our society. These are not my last priorities, they're my first priority, they're the reason I'm in politics. And that means when we support issues such as the devolution, and I support it, the devolution of child protection responsibilities to Aboriginal agencies, resources must flow to support them. It is not enough, and it is unacceptable to expect devolution to occur without adequate resources, and then throw our hands up and say, it's not succeeding. And so I think we need to make those investments, and I have, in the political sense that's important, talked about putting my money where my mouth is, which means that in some cases, in the case of particular taxation in British Columbia, I've said a couple of particular taxes should go up to finance and to support those initiatives in British Columbia. So those are my priorities. There are lots of specific issues. I consider this the first of many meetings I will have with all of you, hopefully individually as well as together. But I wanted to say, to start with, that the issues that you're raising today, the issues that Grand Chief Ed John raised this morning, are issues that are not on my priority list, but at the top of my priority list. People have said for too long, we've waited. We have to take action now, and that's what I intend to do as Leader of the Opposition, and that's what I intend to do if elected Premier of British Columbia. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you to Adrian Dix. We have the opportunity to open the floor for questions or comments, if you feel so inclined. Microphone 12, Wikaninish.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Cliff Atleo, New Channel Tribal Council. Welcome, Mr. Dix. Appreciate your comments. Some of us here have a long memory and remember our friends, the New Democrats, being in power back in the early 90s when we fought the Clayoquot Sound issue.
Yep.
And I don't want to dwell on that. Yep. What I do want to do is point out that around this table there's a multitude of millions of dollars that are on loan and repayable by agreements. Yeah. What isn't talked about is that we own the land, we own the resources. When we engaged in 40 straight days of negotiations over that Clayoquot Sound issue on forestry, the government of the day paid our honoraria and expenses. And that's how it should be. Absolutely. That's how it should be. And so what I'm suggesting to you very strongly is to be an advocate for a resolution that has been approved at this table, that our leadership pursue government to ensure that we don't have to pay a penny back. We're dealing with some agreement and some arrangement with governments of the day over our land and our resources. So we constantly and continually have hope And that's why we want to encourage you and supportive when we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Wikininish. We'd like to go to microphone 9, Chief Maureen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Maureen Chapman, Chief of Skowlook First Nation. Good afternoon, and congratulations on your election.
Thank you.
I would like to raise what I raised this morning with the Premier with regard to our ability as chiefs and leaders of the respective child initiatives to get ministers to respond to us. Understanding the election just occurred, I've written a letter of invitation to the Deputy and to the Minister regarding our Chiefs Coalition, which represents 14 communities in the Eastern Fraser Valley. As well, this is all with regard to the evolution, I call it evolution instead of devolution, from the Ministry of Children and Family Development to an Aboriginal authority. And you're familiar with the Tawasin Accord 2002, and we've been marching along under different names since 2002, having to go back to the table every year, rewrite, reprove that what we're doing, as the ministry has asked us to do, is to demonstrate to them how we can take care of our own children in a better way. My question to you, Mr. Dix, is how can you assist in this process to remove some of those barriers of trying to get to the ministers and having to go with our hand out every year, even though we've got a proven track record in the work that we've done with our children and families? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Maureen. Just to note that we'll take all of the questions from the floor and then go to Mr. Dix for a response. We'll move on to microphone 7, Robert.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My traditional name is Thalfit, Robert Morales, Chief Negotiator for the Halkominum Treaty Group. We represent 6 communities on Vancouver Island, the Cowichan, Lake Cowichan, Halalt, Penelakut, Laxon, and Seminas First Nations. We have over 6,000 members in our group. I'd like to start by thanking the Squamish for having us here and welcoming us into their territory. I met with members of your caucus a while back and raised an important issue that we're currently dealing with. And we have taken our issue to an international forum, to the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. And when you speak of a long-standing grievance, it's ironic and sad that members of our communities were amongst the delegation that went to England in the early 1900s to petition the King of England dealing with this land issue. And at that time, they had said that they did not feel confident that they could deal with this in Canada, and they had to go outside of Canada. In the early 2000s, a delegation of Halkominum chiefs traveled to Washington, D.C., again with the same issue, that we're not confident that we can deal with this issue in Canada, and we've gone outside of Canada to try and deal with it. And as we've taken our petition forward, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights have agreed that they're prepared to hear our case. And in their decision to hear our case, they made 2 important findings. First, they said that they were satisfied that there was no adequate, effective, available domestic remedies, and specifically talking of the courts, that there has been no court in Canada that has recognized and made an order that the government should demarcate and title Indigenous peoples' traditional territories. Secondly, they said that they were satisfied that the treaty process was not effective in protecting the rights of the Halkominum people while we're in this process. So I think that those 2 comments by an international human rights forum is very powerful in terms of its assessment of the current situation here in British Columbia and within our area. And I guess my question to you is, as I spoke with your caucus, what would the NDP government do with respect to this issue? There are international standards, the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. As the Inter-American Court and the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights have been ruling on Indigenous land rights, they have relied on the American Declaration on the Rights and Duties of Man and have said that First Nations, Indigenous peoples have human rights. And if that's true, if we have human rights, then what would the NDP government do to make those human rights actually begin to be effective? Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Microphone 14, Chief Cheryl.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Gisuk Cheryl Casmer, Chief of Akam, member community to the Tanakha Nation. I'd also like to congratulate you on the recent election. I have a proposed solution to an issue that you had put forward, as well as a question. You talked about the plan that you have to deal with poverty. You also talked about the issues related to First Nations health, as well as devolution of services to First Nation communities. And what it all comes down to is whether the government is going to have the adequate resources to support those initiatives. And this is something that has been raised with the Premier, and it's regarding gaming revenues. The province currently is underway with discussion around revenue sharing, but a lot of that revenue sharing discussion is based on land and resources development. And the solution that I'm proposing is that that we need to seriously take a look at First Nations being able to have a share in the casino revenues. BC is the only province that doesn't allow that. And hasn't been an adequate response as to why that is. If First Nations had an opportunity to have access to those resources, we would be able to do a lot within our community. Right now, my community needs 200 homes to house people. We have houses where 10, 12 people live in a 2-bedroom home. If we had the resources like that, we'd be able to address some of those needs without having to rely on the programs and services that currently exist and that we know are not adequately resourced. We're talking about devolution of health, we're talking about devolution of child and family services, and a lot of times what we see on the ground in our community is that the resources aren't there. When the resources are made available, they're not very flexible in order for us to actually meet the needs of what we need to do in our communities. So I leave that with you. The question that I have is that in your comment as well, or in your presentation to us, you talked about how the BC Treaty Commission needed to have more teeth. And I'm just wondering, if you were to become the government, how do you propose to give the Treaty Commission more teeth? Thank you very much, Dacha.
Thank you, Chief. Our last speaker will be at microphone 10, Chief Marjorie.
Thank you. Chief Marjorie McCrae, community of Gittimax in northwestern BC. I just have a couple of questions, and congratulations on your recent election as well. Question number one is, I'd like to know what your position is on jurisdiction as it relates to our band councils and our community. And I'm specifically talking about child welfare. I'm all for partnership building. I believe the partnership building needs to be on our terms. Over the past few years, we've had a huge challenge with regards to the provincial government and the federal government when it comes to child welfare. And I'm not talking about programs and services. You raised the issue of devolution of programs and services from the province where you've delegated these child welfare agencies. That's not what I'm talking about, because the province isn't even paying for that. 97% of the budget comes from INAC, which is Indian dollars. So you made a statement that the government should put their money where their mouth is. If you want to devolve provincial programs and services, in my mind, the province should pay for that. Secondly, I'm fighting for jurisdiction of child welfare, and I want the jurisdiction on our terms. I want the ability, Mr. Dix, to create child welfare methodology, infrastructures, and processes that are going to best meet the needs of my people. And I'm having a heck of a time with INAC and with the provincial government when it comes to that aspect. I don't have any grievance or any issue with the child welfare agencies, but basically what's occurred in many areas is you've put brown faces behind your model, and I don't want that for my community. I want to have the ability to create what's going to work for us and on our terms. And I would even go so far as to ask you if you would support the development and the creation of federal policies and federal standards. This goes outside the paradigm, but I'm all for going outside the paradigm. Things aren't working. In some areas, the agencies are probably doing a good job and it's working for those particular First Nations. It's not working for us. And I think there has to be some level of commitment from the provincial government to support our efforts, because we've never been given that opportunity. We've been adopting your guys' models, your processes, your policies so badly that they're being crammed down our throat. We have to use provincial education policy in order to access INAC money. There's something wrong with that picture. And people have to start thinking differently. My community and my people, we are not programs and services. We are people with needs that need to be met. And imposed, prescribed remedies, they don't work. Everybody has acknowledged that, and there's all kinds of research to prove that it doesn't work. That the people themselves that are entrenched in those challenges have to have the ability to come up with our own strategies, our own methodology on how to solve our problems. And capacity building is a part of that. So if you pay for the devolution of your programs and services to the agencies, that might free up some money for us to do our grassroots development in Gittin Max. And I hold that very, very strong, because the children, everybody talks about how important child welfare is and how important education is. And no matter what anybody does around treaty or jurisdiction, if we don't have our children safe in nurturing and healthy environments based on our culture, our terms, we're not going to see positive change. And there's not going to be much of a future for our children. And I'm going to continue to fight for that. Jurisdiction is very important for me, to have the ability to have a voice and a say. The tripartite health was a very, very moving day when the mandate came down, because we are on a level playing field. The federal, provincial government and the First Nations in British Columbia made history. We're on a level playing field. Why can't we be on a level playing field for child welfare? Thank you.
Thank you. Our last speaker will be the gentleman beside Cliff Atleo at microphone 12.
Introduce
You mean the handsome gentleman beside Cliff Atleo?
That's exactly what I meant.
My name is Hikusul. I come from Homas, west of Estevan Point. Homas is part of the Confederation of Heshquit. I'm the head of the House of Homas. What I want to talk about here is, I listened to Christy Clark this morning. She talked about historic injustice. She talked about reconciliation. And I guess we need to understand all of our histories. People around this table need to go back and look at what happened and try to understand what happened in the 1800s. The colonial government, the injustice, the misunderstanding, the lack of understanding, the lack of will to understand in relation to one of my ancestors. And I think around this table here, around this province, there's many examples of what happened to my grandfather, the historic injustice. That my great-great-grandfather was tried for a murder he never committed, and the research proves he never did it. But it was this misunderstanding between the colonial people of the day and the Aboriginal people who lived on the coast who didn't understand that culture. There was a misunderstanding of cultures. And I think that the research proves that, that my grandfather was innocent. He went to his grave and sung a song about his innocence. Now, what I'm after is an apology from the government. I wish I was here yesterday to bring it up so Christy Clark would hear this. But what we need to do is we need to reconcile our histories of the injustice. My grandfather was tried for a murder he never committed. But he didn't only convict him of murder, but it states in the research that they took him up right in front of his people, where I come from, and hung him right in front of his family. And the statement that came out of that was, we need to show these Indians who is really here. So I think that we need to reconcile these histories, because that's going to lay the foundation for a solid relationship in the future. So I could go on and on about this story, but there is research there, and I think Scott is very aware of it. So I think what we're looking for is support, that we can bring this issue and resolve this issue. It's been sitting within my family for the last 140 years, unresolved. And just leave you with this little bit of information. My grandfather was hung by the colonial government in 1869. He had a son who was honored by the President of the United States for doing exactly the same thing that my grandfather did. And he was awarded with a gold medal from the President of the United States for taking people who were shipwrecked on the coast and burying those dead people. So I think that very clearly we need your support to get this government to reconcile, not only with us, but there's other people in this province who have had similar histories, very negative history, and but we need to resolve those so that we can build a solid foundation to have a future relationship with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Dix, microphone 2.
Thank you. And in different orders, just on that, Scott Fraser, a while ago now, I'm trying to think when it was, told that story at the behest of Carol James, who's leader of the NDP. And so as long as we're in opposition, we'll be seeking that apology. But that day of reconciliation needs to come. And you have my commitment, it will come. Because I've seen the evidence, and I've seen the story you've told, and I've heard you today, and you have my commitment on that. On Maureen and Marjorie raised issues about children's and family services from different places, a little bit different places in where it's and where things are at. I think that I agree with you that the whole period of evolution, we'll call it evolution, right, of those services has not been a good one for the provincial government. I don't mean that in a partisan way, one party or another party. I think just in general. I think there have been good intentions, but I think the issue of resources is central, that much of that evolution occurred in the context of dramatic cuts across the child services system. And you're asking to build capacity and infrastructure with less than we had before. And that has never happened successfully in any area of jurisdiction amongst any group or people in society. I mean, if you're going to dramatically change the structure, it's going to cost more in the short run. And if you're successful, it will save you in the long run. I'm open-minded on these issues. 50% of children in care in BC, it's said many times, more than 50% are Aboriginal. In most jurisdictions, including jurisdictions with large First Nations communities, that number in other provinces is 30%. If there are clearly lessons to be learned and things we need to change to improve that, that will require resources in their application, and that will require us working together to make it happen and respecting the critical and central role of First Nations communities in making decisions about their children. So this is something we need to discuss more, but it's a very, very high priority for me, the issue of children and family development. Those issues are separately. There's a child tragedy in the news today, and it's, of course, heartbreaking to all of us to hear those stories. And I don't want to pass any comment except to say, to express on that question my understanding of the real grief that is felt. But I think one of the challenges we have in our province is that it's every day that these issues are important, not just the day that tragedy appears in newspapers. It's every day, and we have to act consistent with that. And and I've worked on these issues prior to this as an MLA, and what I had to say wasn't always right on those issues, I have to say. But I think that as leader of the opposition and as premier, I'll be working on them with all my heart. Cliff was first. I'm doing these in the order I wrote them down here, so it's no order in particular, a different part of my what I have to say. I agree with you. We've set up very elaborate processes, and then essentially we're putting people in long-term debt to deal with those, and there has to be better ways to do that. I mean, I think realistically on the broad treaty-making one, for example, we're cutting expenditure on treaties while we're talking about our commitment to the new relationship, you know? And that doesn't make sense to me. And on both sides, you're talking about trying to achieve more with considerably less. And I think that our commitment to process of all kinds, existing agreements and agreements to be, has to be matched by resources. And that's our intention. It's a very high priority. We've simply got to do better than we've done in the last few years. And this isn't a criticism, you know. We've gone through a period where we signed a number of agreements in the 1990s, and I'm not saying the government in the 1990s was perfect on these issues, far, far from it. I'm all too aware of that. But we signed the Nishka Agreement, then we had a party come to power which took the Nishka Agreement to court, then we had a referendum, then we had a transformation of views. And I give Mr. Campbell some credit for making some of those changes. But I don't think always the results have been consistent with the rhetoric, and and our commitment will be to try and do that. by applying more resources on both sides, because we need to somehow come to some agreements. It's in our economic interests, but it's also about reconciliation and moving forward. Robert, Scott has repeatedly raised the issue of the government of British Columbia's signed support for the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and that's our commitment. We intend to live up to that, and that's a commitment we've given as a political party. I believe passed at convention, passed by our caucus, and led by our lead spokesperson on it. And so that has implications, and those we can talk about, but that's a short answer for a longer discussion hopefully we'll have about the specifics of that. But that's the context. And I think the final question is, and if I didn't get to them all, my apologies, is on the issue of gaming. And we have a review right now, and my commitment is to begin a process from the opposition side of talking to you about moving on those questions so that some of those resources will be available as well. I think that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Dix. We'll move to microphone 4 for...
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Mr. Dix and Mr. Fraser. Thank you for the time you were able to spend with our leaders, for you to hear some of the issues that are being brought forward, and also to be able to respond with commitments to all of the issues that were raised, particularly on this floor. I'd like to be able to leave with you the information that we provided to the government this morning. Outlines critical issues that were raised and have been consistently raised by the chiefs around this table, and also affirmed yesterday and this morning, to be able to present this as an important set of information with a view to revisit this and to look at how these changes could be affected. And certainly welcome the comment you made earlier around perhaps a high-level political process that would re-examine where this is not being as successful as it should be. And certainly this is what the chiefs have been calling for this morning. We heard our national chief saying that the Prime Minister of this country has agreed to a process like that to deal with the implementation and the negotiations, and to review the federal comprehensive claims policy. So I think that we're again getting to an important revisiting moment where political will needs to come to the fore, not disappear, as we've seen in the past too often, or where political will appears and suddenly disappears behind bureaucracy, and that's been our experience. So I'd like to be able to leave that with you. Certainly welcome the comments about the party, the opposition party endorsing the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. I'm not sure the specific wording of that. We've consistently in this floor, along with the Union of BC Chiefs and the BC Assembly of First Nations, calling on the parties, government and opposition, to put forward a resolution in the House that would endorse the declaration in British Columbia, and again call on your government, if it's formed or in your continued role as the opposition leader, to take that next step that we've called for, is to provide for that place of the declaration, so that we have a certain set of minimum standards that have been accepted by the United Nations, by 148 countries who voted yes and in favor of the declaration, to be able to now see that translated and the implementation of that in this province. Those standards are important. There are minimum standards, and if you're willing, we're prepared to brief your caucus on this particular issue, and continue, and other issues as well, to continue this really important dialogue. And so with that, again, thank you for taking the time, and giving us the opportunity to hear your views and to be able to meet with you face to face since your election as leader. So we'll leave these two documents with you. Two documents, one of our presentation to the governing party this morning, just so you are aware of the issues we've raised, but also the document that was presented to us by the National Chief on the commitments that were made by the AFN with the federal government, including the Minister of Aboriginal Affairs and the Prime Minister of Canada as a new way forward. So with that, thank you again.